On Saturday, the Ohio State Buckeyes once again played a non-contestant. The Buckeyes' non-conference schedule has been very weak, but that doesn't mean there aren't takeaways to be made. And we will get some more answers about Ohio State football this coming weekend when they travel to East Lansing. Michigan State is not a good team, but they are much better than anyone who Ohio State has played. And the Buckeyes have a, very tough Big Ten conference schedule because the week after they play Michigan State, they play Iowa, who has one of their best teams in quite some time under Kirk Ferentz. And then after that, they take the road against Oregon. So we will know things about Ohio State pretty quickly. And I think, based off of preseason research that I've done and that many of you have done, and also what we have seen in these first three games, that there are some takeaways we can make from Ohio State's dominant 49-14 win over the Marshall Thundering Herd. But before we get into that and I give you some of the takeaways that I have, I want you, yes you, to like the video, to subscribe to the channel, to click that notification bell, comment your reaction and analysis of this game down in the comments section, because you probably saw something that I didn't. That's what happens when we each watch games, is there are things that we pick up, but things that we also miss. So the more sets of eyes you have on a game, the better. So let me know what you thought about this game down in the comments section. Subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, like the video, share the channel and video around fellow football fanatics like us who care about the game. If you want access to my weekly picks against the spread and also straight up who I think is going to win, sign up on my Patreon page as an All-American or Heisman member at patreon.com/CFB. In all caps is capital C, capital F, capital B, lowercase w, capital S for Sam. You can find the link in the description and also down below in the pinned comment. And also sign up for our Discord server, which again is in the description or in the pinned comment as a link. But let's get down to business here and discuss what was a dominant performance by the Ohio State Buckeyes. Ohio State did start off slow. I saw on, the Twitter, or formerly known as the Twitter, the X rather, that there were some complaints about the first quarter and about the initial few series of drives that the Ohio State defense managed. But Marshall is known for having competent rushing offenses, in part because their head coach, Charles Huff, was an elite running backs coach, and he's developed good rushing offenses at Marshall during his tenure there. And Marshall was profiled as the best opponent Ohio State had played all year by a mile. Way better than Akron, superior to Western Michigan. They play actually this weekend. Marshall and Western Michigan do in week 5. Marshall's currently a 5.5-point favorite at home. So I found that interesting. And really, when I take those things into consideration, and then after that first quarter when Ohio State calmed down, they really got rolling. This wasn't a worse performance, certainly, than they had against Akron in the first half, which was just not good enough for Ohio State. After the first quarter, this team bounced back. They were putting up points upon points upon points, and they had a very dominant and efficient performance, particularly on the offensive side of the ball. And if not for some of the struggles in stopping the run that Ohio State had, and also if not for Marshall's competent rushing attack, aggressive style of play, and commitment to their identity, which ate up nearly 40 minutes of clock, Ohio State may have scored 70-plus points here. You look at just the broad overview of this game, the base results, Marshall only averaged 3.8 yards per play, which is pretty good overall, and actually elite, I would say. Of course, yeah, it's Marshall, but holding any team to under 4 yards per play, factoring in that, most teams pass for far over 3.8 yards per play, if not most pass for over 5 yards per play per pass attempt through the air. And they were only held to about 1/5 of a point per play. Marshall was 0.206 thank you, points per play for Marshall. Ohio State, on the other hand, averaged literally almost exactly 10 yards per play. Every time Ohio State snapped the ball, on average, they picked up a first down. And sometimes there was an incomplete pass. Sometimes there was a 2-3 yard run. Most of the time, though, it was long rushes, screen passes, or slants taken to the house by Emeka Egbuka or Carnell Tate, and just overall a phenomenally efficient performance by the Ohio State offense, where they averaged 0.860 points per play. That right there is just, that's nuts, honestly. That is totally insane. They averaged nearly a point per play. And that was after a first quarter where Will Howard threw an interception. It wasn't a terrible pass. It was really his only bad play of the day. It was just a little too much on the outside of Marshall's corner, which is why they were able to intercept it. The interception from Marshall was by Josh Moten. But outside of that, this offense was humming, and nothing could stop them. And then they put in backup Devin Brown. That's honestly why they weren't scoring a whole point per play, is they put in the backups. Ryan Day and his staff did, the Buckeyes, and they just got out of there. And respect to them. That's what the elite staffs, the great staffs, are going to do in games like this, is they're going to use it to showcase some of their explosivity, try some new things, and also get in the backups and the third stringers and see what they're capable of doing. They actually had a change in the special teams that we'll talk about here in a few minutes too, like a change they're going to make moving forward. So these games are useful, like even though they're typically blowouts for the winning team, for the Power 4 team, when they host a group of 5 team like this, they're very useful to, figure out the kinks in the hose and all that stuff. What I want to start out with is anything that I could classify as bad or unacceptable, because on this show, we save the best for last. There are 2 points that I want to make for Ohio State later in the video that I think are good, very positive, but I do want to start off with the bad, or what I would just say is the mediocre, because I don't think that the defense is anything but elite, and the defensive line is certainly great. But when you have the talent they do on the defensive line, and your weakness ever since 2021 has been stopping the rushing attack and has been getting pressure on opposing quarterbacks and really utilizing your defensive front properly on an average basis. I know in 2022, Ohio State's D-line and front was their strength, and it was the secondary that was bad. But for the talent that Ohio State's defensive line has, their front has, they have been underperforming for 3 years in a row, maybe even 4 if you go back to 2020. So far this season, through 3 games, they have 9 sacks, which is better than many schools. It's better than Penn State, for example, who doesn't even have 6 sacks through 3 games. They have 9 sacks, Ohio State's defensive line does. And you look at this Marshall game where they, yes, only allowed 2.9 yards per carry, only 125 yards. But what was disturbing is the fact that it wasn't like Marshall had just a fluke play where they got 50 yards on the ground. There's nothing like that at all. Marshall's long rush in this game was 16 by Ethan Payne. They didn't have a rush of over 20 yards. They were able to consistently move Ohio State at the point of attack and on the interior. And I know that Tyleik Williams wasn't playing, but Ohio State has really good depth on the defensive line. Keep in mind, they returned all of their defensive linemen outside of I'm forgetting his name, Michael Hall Jr. He was the only one who left the defensive line, departed for the NFL after last season, and good luck to him in the professionals. But everyone else returned. And of course, recruiting and development, you expect with all the starters back that the D-line is building upon itself and building upon itself. I got to be honest, watching this game, it looks like Ohio State's defense once again has an issue with being fully efficient on the defensive line. And you may say I'm overreacting, and maybe I am, but we've seen against Akron where they're able to pick up 4th downs. They're able to run, for a consistent 1, 2, maybe 3 yards per carry, and that's a MAC school who's talentless. Marshall isn't talentless. They were able to have more success. Marshall was able to pick up 7 third downs, 1 fourth down. Their first drive, look at this. I don't even think they have the play-by-play, sadly. But their first drive was over 6 minutes of clock, nearly 7 minutes of clock. Multiple plays, and they punched it in. It honestly, on that drive, it looked like how Iowa or Michigan or some of these, like Rutgers, like it looked like what Rutgers did against Ohio State last year, or what Michigan did on their final drive against Ohio State last season, where they would just slowly drive and eat TOP and the defense couldn't get off the field. Again, I'm not saying this defense or D-line is bad. What I'm saying is against Penn State and against Michigan, against Iowa, against Oregon, and against Nebraska, maybe even against Indiana if they're legit, if Marshall on another day was able to do this yet again on the ground against Ohio State's defensive line, those teams will be averaging 4 yards per carry on the ground, 3.5, 3. And we have seen, whether it was last year, whether it was the year prior, and now entering year 3, that Jim Knowles' defenses, I think he's an elite defensive coordinator, but there's something going on with that defensive line where if you're patient and if you have good running backs and you're disciplined and you have integrity in the trenches, you can move this defense. And Michigan, Iowa, Penn State, Oregon, if what they did against Oregon State is who they are going to be for the rest of the season, Nebraska, if they fix some things after their loss to Illinois, and Indiana, if they're legit, those teams will be able to find ways to chew clock, keep Ohio State's offense off the field, and score some points on this defense. I think what Jim Knowles has to do is be willing to be more aggressive, because every time I saw Ohio State line up like they're going to send 6 or 7 guys forward, 3 of them back off, or 2 of them back off, and they only send 4. They're still playing a very conservative style of defense. Obviously, from what I've seen offensively, they are saving stuff for future games, so I think part of that may be the case with the defense too, but they had similar issues last season. Again, like against Rutgers and against Michigan, and if Penn State ran the ball more in that game, it probably would have came up there with Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton. And it was also the case with Notre Dame late in the game. But I want to move on now and talk about Ohio State's athletes because, again, it's only week 3. We don't know. And Ohio State may be saving things for that Oregon game. So we'll have to see what happens with the Silver Bullets and their defense. They'll be facing a Michigan State team who's better at running the football than anyone they've played so far and has an athletic quarterback. So we might get some answers there. But one thing I know for certain that's positive is Ohio State's athletes might be college football's quickest. I'm watching screen passes and slants be taken to the house effortlessly with few tackles broken, a few of them, but also just whatever space they have, the receivers, running backs, whether it's this or even if it's just a little bit, they have a glimpse of space. They're heading home. These running backs, these wide receivers, they can squeeze through like a window, a tight window, and just go to the house, have a home run hitter. The only way Ohio State was stopped in this game, and probably will be the case for the rest of the season, is if you play nearly perfect on defense. If you have any type of breakdowns, these athletes will take advantage. And case in point is the fact that Ohio State averaged 10 yards per play, and that's factoring in Devin Brown playing. That's factoring in backup running backs and backup wide receivers and backup offensive linemen. When you look exclusively at Will Howard, Quinshon Judkins, and Travion Henderson, the main starters at running back and quarterback, and consequently the starting quarterback's mostly going to be throwing 2 starting wide receivers or wide receivers who are with, the 1s or 2s or in that rotation, you look at what the starters averaged on offense, and they averaged 13 yards per play, which is just crazy and utterly phenomenal. So if you want to answer that question down in the comments section below, because again, as I've said for seemingly the millionth time now, it's only week 3 and we don't know. And Texas is really quick. Alabama is fast. Penn State, I don't know if they're quote unquote like one of the fastest teams in college football, but they're averaging insane amounts of yardage per play too, and points per play as well. That Bowling Green game, we'll see if it was a fluke or not, but Bowling Green played Texas A&M tighter than they played Penn State, and I think that Bowling Green is like an actual good team, and they pounded West Virginia. Penn State did. They pounded Kent State after a slow start, and then there are other teams too who are fast, like Oregon. I think Oregon is one of the fastest teams in college football. Ohio State is up there in terms of speed, and from what I've seen through 3 weeks, I would say it's probably them or Texas that is the fastest team in college football. And when you look exclusively at week 4, well, I'd give it to the Buckeyes. Number 1, gold medal. What they were able to do against Marshall, just even with minimal space or wide open holes, scoring touchdowns. Quinton Judkins had an insanely long touchdown run, a long rush of 86, where Marshall just didn't plug a gap. Boom, gone. Henderson had a long of 40, and that was also, I believe, a touchdown. Quinton Judkins, he had a 6-yard run in the fourth quarter, the 86-yard run in the second quarter. Henderson had a 14-yard run. Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Egbuka had receiving touchdowns of over 50 yards, and Emeka's was a screen, and Jeremiah's was a slant, and they took those to the house. So the athleticism here at skill position is crazy, and we know, despite the fact that Ohio State's not running Will Howard right now, they're hiding that for later games. We know he's athletic too. He's Ohio State's most athletic quarterback in terms of at least being willing to use his athleticism since Justin Fields. Maybe C.J. Stroud was more athletic, but he didn't want to run. Howard clearly wants to run, and the staff will use him in such ways and play to that strength of his, I think, in future games. I think even this weekend against Michigan State, you'll probably see some of that. But just a question, something to ponder, and I think it's closer to a fact than something we're just seeing because of weak competition, that Ohio State's athletes may in fact be college football's quickest. And last but certainly not least, we don't know much, as I've said earlier, but I think this team is top 5. Their strengths are clearly skill positions, wide receiver, running back. The offensive line looks better than it did last year, and combining that with the upgrades at running back, with a wide receiver room that's very strong, with a quarterback in Will Howard who looks improved compared to his self at Kansas State last season, and a defense that has college football's number 1 secondary, a defense that has an elite defensive coordinator, and all these things still has a good defensive line. The O-line looks good. Linebacker, I think, is taking a step back from last year. Same with tight end. But there's a lot of youth there, a lot of potential, so we could see growth. I would say the defensive line is a weak link. I listed it as a weakness, and those two terms are really interchangeable. But what I mean typically by weak link is it's a spot on the team that is strong nationally, but when you look at how this team is organized, it's one of the weaker positions on the team. You could also say the same with weakness if you are just looking at a specific team. That's what I'm doing here. Ohio State's defensive line is one of the better defensive lines in the country, but so far through the first 3 weeks, it has not looked elite. I mean, I can say just based off of quality of opponent and film that Michigan's defensive line may actually be way better, or at least way more efficient than Ohio State's defensive line. Like, Ohio State's D-line may just be as talented and have as much NFL talent especially at edge. I think on interior, Michigan is clearly more talented when it comes to NFL draft potential and all that stuff, like physical tools, how elite can they be, their ceiling. But on an efficiency basis, Michigan has faced much better offensive lines and gotten similar sack numbers and pressure numbers. Michigan has faced more talented offenses and running backs. And, I mean, Texas may have the nation's best offensive line. And, you know, just looking at that, and USC, who has a great center in Jonah Monheim, not an elite O-line, but an O-line that's way better than Western Michigan or Marshall or, gosh, almost forgot about Akron, but Akron's very forgettable anyway. The D-line needs to step up. They have to. At this point, Michigan, I would say Georgia. I don't know if there are many other teams up there who have like really good defensive line play that are better than Ohio State's, but Michigan right now looks much better. Iowa's had success, I think better success against the run than Ohio State has. And Utah's defensive line's really good. I already mentioned Georgia. Penn State has a whole lot of talent there. They shut down West Virginia's rushing attack. Bowling Green, I think, used the pass to open up the run, and they completely killed Kent State on the ground too. But Kent State's not that good, so we'll have to see. Again, it's early, but it's just something to pay attention to, especially given Ohio State's past struggles against the run and the fact that against Marshall, they had some issues stopping them short as well. For special teams, I believe it was Jaden Fielding who was benched from kickoff duties because he kicked 3 kickoffs out of bounds, which is, you know, pretty bad, unacceptable, as Ryan Day said. And they benched him, and they trotted out Austin Snyder, I believe, I think is who they trotted out. But I could be wrong. I didn't pay attention to who replaced him. I just saw that he was replaced. So some things to keep in mind. But this team's obviously top 5. And they're probably higher than that, like top 4, top 3. They could be the best team in all of college football from what I have seen so far this season. And I would say they're certainly the best team in the Big Ten. Lastly, my MVP for this game is running back Quinton Judkins. 14 attempts on the ground, 173 yards, 12.4 yards per carry, and 2 touchdowns. And I will tell you, Henderson was pretty close too. Travion Henderson, I'm watching him power through opposing defenders, which is terrifying to think about because we know that Henderson in space is elite. We've known that ever since he stepped on campus. Now he can power through people and put his head down and churn forward for like an extra 5 yards. I know it was against Marshall, but it's something I haven't seen from him before, and that was good. That was impressive from him. And as for Judkins, the breakaway speed, the acceleration, the vision, the fact that he also can truck people, break tackles, fall forward for yards. This is college football's #1 running back room, and it's not even close. Thank you all so much for watching this video. Remember to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below. Thanks to Crash2488 and Brasco Rascal for being Heisman members and sponsoring this video and channel. Thanks to Chris Lane, Connor OH, Ismar, Tyler 9, Chilton Cush for being All-American members. And thanks to John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Steele, Austin Christmas, and Janaisha Cockrell for being All-Conference members. Sign up as an All-American or a Heisman member if you want to access the exclusive content on Patreon, and my merchandise store and Discord server links, along with my Patreon page link, are also in the description and below in the pinned comment. Have a great day, guys. Go Buckeyes.